Welcome to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio, helping you move forward with focus, hope, and confidence, saving you time, money, and your sanity as you build a better life post-divorce. I'm Steve Peck. Deborah Moskovich, divorce consultant, educator, and author of The Smart Divorce, brings you the leading experts and researchers in the divorce arena. We'll also speak with those in the trenches, people who've learned from their divorce and how their experience has changed their lives. And they would tell you for the better. Divorce can be a beginning, even if it looks like an end, and rich in opportunity to learn and grow from. And on the Smart Divorce Radio Show, we'll explore how to create a positive outlook post-divorce life. And now, here's Deborah. Hi, Deb.
How are you today?
I'm great. How are you?
Oh, so I'm talking to you through Skype this time.
I know.
The last few interviews have been done in person, which was totally a different experience. It was phenomenal.
Finally got to meet the great Deborah Moskovich in person.
And the fabulous Steve Peck in person. So I've got a great show for you today.
What's
up? I'm really hyped. Friday, I was chairing a panel through AFCC, Association of Family Conciliation Courts. And for those listeners that are looking for some resources for parents, go to afcc.org. Org or .net? I think it's afcc.org. I'll check that out as we go along here. But I chaired a panel on what adult children of divorce have to say. And I have to say, it was phenomenal. Phenomenal, gut-wrenching, and a lot of tears, but also inspiring. So we had 3 adult children of divorce share their stories of growing up in specific custody arrangements, and 2 of our adult speakers, who I am telling you are phenomenal women, because despite the odds of the environments that they grew up in, they're accomplished, married, have kids, introspective, want to change the patterns from their family of origin so that they don't grow up in the environments that they did. One woman grew up in an environment where mother married 5 times, father married 6 times.
Oh, my God.
And she raised her brother from a very early age, and she raised herself. So it was really interesting to hear, and she was alienated from her father, really did not have a relationship with her father. And so it was really interesting to see how she did not let that bring her down. And, at 40 years old, is now as an articling law student for family law firm. And I think that that's really, to me, an inspiring story to offer hope that doesn't matter what kind of environment you grow up in, you can do it.
Haven't we talked before, though, about statistics that show that children of divorce go on to marry later and some not at all? And then if they have children, there's a lot that are making the decision to not have children. Those were some of the stats we talked about in prior shows.
Well, but here I had 3 adult children of divorce who had 3 very different experiences. So I mentioned one woman who went to law school at a little bit of an later age, but she married very early on because she wanted stability. She married someone who gave her that stability and family warmth and nurturing. I had another person who spoke, also alienated from her father, had very minimal relationship contact with him over the years, but yet rose above the adversity that she grew up in, and also just coincidentally became a lawyer, not a family law lawyer. She married very early on because she wanted the stability in the relationship, but she realized that wasn't the right relationship for her, divorced, and is remarried and has 2 great kids and in a fabulous relationship. And then the 3rd adult child of divorce we spoke to, he grew up in a household where the parents were able to cooperatively co-parent. And, that was the great story that you really want to hear. However, there was still a bit of, I wouldn't say conflict, but there was stuff between the parents. And one of the stuff that the parents had issue with were finances. And, one would complain over the other about paying or not paying. And so this kid at 12 years old almost became the bookkeeper. So what I'm thrilled about is our guest today, Denise Whitehead, who shared her research at the panel on the adult child's perspective on transitions, relationships, and fairness. We've got Denise on the line to talk about what the research says.
Great.
Denise is a trained lawyer and a social scientist who completed her PhD in family relations and human development at the University of Guelph. So she's going to share her research and tell us more about what the research entailed and then what it says and how we can help parents then, or how Denise can help parents through her research think about things in a very different way so that children look at life more positively and have more positive outcomes.
Great. Denise, welcome to The Smart Divorce on Divorce Source Radio.
Well, thank you both of you for this great opportunity.
Denise, I love what you had to say on Friday. I think that you offered some really good messages to parents in terms of what they need to consider in terms of their actions so that their kids don't live out the divorce negatively in terms of their self-esteem, self-awareness, all that, the stuff we talk about, the education and what the kids are lacking and what they need out of life. And, kids need both parents, but if they don't have both parents, what should kids do? What should parents think about? And I think that you learned some really important lessons from these adult children of divorce, and I'd love for you to share that.
Thanks. Well, let me start by outlining that my children, in some ways, were rather unique in that pretty much all of them at some point had lived in a shared custodial arrangement. So we weren't talking about children who'd been alienated from a parent. We use the definition in Canada that they had lived a minimum of 40%, so it's a quite time-intensive arrangement. One of the things that brought me to this research is that we've been fairly aware for some time now that while there are increasing numbers of families using shared custody, it still is a minority arrangement. And one of the other perplexing aspects has been that while shared custody arrangements look fairly stable for the first 2 to 3 years, they show great change in transitions over time. And in fact, in Canada, by the time you get to year 6, fewer than 8% of families who had started in shared custody were still in that arrangement. And we are seeing that in other jurisdictions like California, in the United States, as well as Australia. So that's not a unique phenomena to us as well.
So, Denise, when we talk about shared custody, shared parenting, we're not talking about decision making. We're talking about where the kids live, right?
In this case, that's the way we think about it. And generally, in those instances, what follows is shared decision making. But yes, a particular emphasis on the fact that it's shared time in the living experience for children.
But you know what was so fascinating, and we're going to get into this during the conversation, but many parents, parents are concerned that they're not going to have enough time with their kids. Mm-hmm. So, in a high conflict situation especially, parents are fighting over where the kids should live, how much time they should be at each home. But at the end of the day, as you say, like 2 or 3 years later, it actually unfolds with the children's wishes, not with the parents' wishes. And sometimes then it looks like the parents are foisting their wishes upon the kids with doing what society thinks that they should be doing rather than what the parents are capable of doing.
And I think that speaks to the fact that over time, so many things change. Not only do things often change for parents, and that can be around work, but certainly one of the biggest things is about repartnering. But for children, they're going through tremendous changes as well. So for instance, all of my children had experienced their parents' divorce between the ages of 7 and 12. So if you think about that, they're still fairly young, and all of them acknowledged, without knowing a great deal of detail, that the parents had by and large made the decision for the children that there would be shared custody. If there was going to be change, and for 22 of the children in my study who had started off in shared custody, 10 of them eventually left it. And all of them did that in adolescence, except for one who had done it 11 years of age. And for many of them, it was that so many things had changed. Maybe parents were no longer living in proximity. They might actually, in fact, be living across a municipal boundary, meaning the child couldn't even take a bus anymore and had to rely on parents to drive. Certainly repartnering was a big aspect, and that can really go in a tremendously positive way. So many children spoke about wonderful step-parents who have stepped in and helped provide for their post-secondary education, were the ones who taught them to drive, maybe taught them woodworking skills. But equally on the other side were so many children stressing about two things. Either they were having conflict with the step-parent, or their parent and the new partner were having conflict, making the home a very difficult place for children to live. And so that would often prompt changes. Jennifer McIntosh in Australia likes to say, adolescents vote with their feet.
Yeah, I've heard that many times over, and that is so true. Denise, just tell us, how old were these adult children when you spoke to them for your research?
Yeah, they were still fairly young.
Okay.
One of the criteria was they had to be between the ages of 18 and 25. Because I had done most of my recruitment at a university here. In fact, most of them are fairly young and were in first, second, and third year university with an average age of only 19 and a half years, which makes for a very interesting transition point. Many of them are living away from home now. They're showing increased independence while they're also working towards finishing, an undergraduate degree. But you also see tremendous dependence still amongst them. Most of them are still looking to family for financial support and need a place to go home to during holidays. And that brought out some interesting things as they wrestle with where they should go and whether or not they still need to make that time equal when they're returning home for holiday time.
So then their memories were pretty fresh. It's not like they were rewriting history because they're looking back, 20 years later to see.
Well, there is still a retrospective component to it, but yes, it is still very fresh. And in fact, some of them will even tell you they're still living shared custody, even though they're now 18 years of age or older and no longer minor children.
Really? So how does that work as an 18-year-old? Like, now they're getting ready for university. So how does that
they're not living legal custody. This is about, again, this discourse about how even children are starting to internalize that the only fair arrangement is to make sure that their time is split equally between parents. And one of the things that I would really want parents to know is that children will go to extraordinary lengths to protect their parents' feelings. And if that means that they have to continue to share their time equally so that their parents will not perceive that the child has played any favoritism, many children will continue to do that even if it's inconvenient. Some won't, but many will.
So that puts so much pressure on kids.
Mm-hmm. I don't think we appreciate sometimes the work that children are doing. And this isn't to pathologize children, to suggest that, this is inappropriate actions on their part always. And this isn't even always about children being caught in the middle, per se, because sometimes some of the most difficult relationships that my participants were talking about was not always the relationship between their biological parents. Sometimes it was even the challenges they were experiencing personally with a parent or personally with a step-parent.
Okay, so let's look at that then. Because children are the ones that live out divorce. And yes, I remember saying this on Friday. I said this on Friday, when my kids started on this shared parenting, they would be with me, on one weekend, their dad on another weekend. And so, on my weekend, I could do whatever I wanted. I could sleep in. I didn't have bags to pack. I stayed home, right?
Not so bad after all.
No, and the funny thing is, really, like, my married friends would look at me and say, "Whoa, you lead a great life." And I'm thinking to myself, you think it's a great life, like, because I don't have my kids on the weekend? Yeah, like, it's a break. But look at what it's doing to my kids. And I think that's what people are losing their focus on, is what that means to the kids. Because then I see my kids packing up their bags every other weekend. My kids wondering, okay, so what am I going to do Saturday? What am I doing Friday night? Especially as they got older. Do I have the right clothes for the party? My daughter needs her hair straightener and, all that kind of thing. I ended up buying her some stuff so she could have it at her dad's house. But, it's different environments. So, Denise, if you could share some of your research in terms of what these kids felt about, having to go back and forth between mom's house and dad's house.
And also, if I could also add that you've heard of this nesting situation, right? Where the kids stay in the house and it's the mom and dad that move in and out. So I wonder about that.
I actually did have one participant who had started in a nesting relationship. It had actually worked fairly well for a few years, particularly since mom had gone back to school. But of course, what's the number one reason why nesting relationships have to end? Somebody repartners, and that no longer works. And in this case, dad was the one who repartnered, and so the nesting relationship ended at that point. And that in and of itself, was certainly a change for these children, but as this participant would have acknowledged, the far bigger change was that dad entered into a very conflictual relationship with his new wife, which did eventually end in a second divorce. And she was because she was the older sister with a younger sibling, she was a very active young lady who worked hard to protect her brother from that conflict, and sometimes would tell them that he didn't need to be hearing this, and would take her brother back to their mom's house so that they could escape the conflict that they were experiencing in the other household.
And that puts a lot of responsibility on the kids, right? Because they're parentified. They're put in this role of not being children, but, being adults.
Well, and at some point, I hope to talk more about the fact that, children do two things. One, they're not only assuming responsibility to what I call manage up their parents' behaviors. For instance, a number of my participants, we talked about how, relatively young adult they were. For a lot of them, the most recent big event in their life had been high school graduation or prom. And a number of them spoke quite lovingly about, how parents were able to sit together, have pictures together, but there were also just as many who spoke about the fact that mom and dad could not sit next to each other. There couldn't be group pictures, and only one parent could come to the graduation dinner because it would just be too awkward to have them both there.
Yeah,
so children do a lot of work that way, but it's also true that children do a lot of work for their siblings. And so, again, it's often about who's the older sibling, but older siblings take on a huge amount of responsibility, whether it's shielding their younger sibling from parental conflict, particularly during the breakup phase, certainly helping to help them pack. And you talked about belongings, and that is definitely, there is no child, even amongst those who said that they had an absolutely wonderful shared custodial arrangement, who enjoy the effort that it takes to schlep their belongings back and forth and what it takes to remember things. And what was really fascinating was how some parents are, again, really actively work to support that. For instance, you talked about buying a second supply of things to have, so they didn't have to remember everything. And a lot of what you could see were whether or not parents were willing, for instance, to make the drive to retrieve forgotten belongings. There was one wonderful set of parents who took a huge amount of effort to do the packing and the unpacking, both to relieve their children of the responsibility, but also because they felt strongly about trying to make the children feel settled. And in contrast, I had other parents who were almost punitive to their children and expected even a 9 and 10-year-old boy to not forget things, and said, well, I'm sorry if you forgot it, tough luck, you'll have to wear the ugly cleats at soccer practice next week because I'm not going to do that. You'll have to remember next time. So huge differences in how parents approach that, and again, makes a big difference on whether children feel that they want to keep doing that arrangement.
And so that's interesting that you say that. So for instance, for those kids that feel that pressure to have all the right things, otherwise they're going to have to wear the ugly cleats or, not have the hair straightener. So, for girls, how they are with their hair. I mean, I'm the same, with my hair, whatever. But, so does that mean that they are beginning to opt out of the relationship or opt out of the custody arrangements?
Yeah, so some of them do. I like to say that there's really a complex set of factors that influence whether or not children move in or out of a custodial arrangement, and no one thing ever drives that. So belongings are never the sole factor. Usually they combine with things like whether or not they have flexibility to move between the households a little more freely, or whether it's a rigid arrangement. A big part of it has to do with the relationships. I talk about the push and pulls of relationships. Close relationships relationships acts as a pull. Children want to either maintain an arrangement that, especially shared custody where it's working in the relationship they have with both parents, but it also can work as a pull where they want to spend more time with a parent, particularly that they have a much closer relationship to. And pushes are usually around conflict or a less close relationship that they have. But other factors that influence whether or not a child makes a choice is also about proximity of parents' living situation. And it's astounding how many parents are living 30 and 40 minutes away. And when the children are much younger, I think there's an acceptance, both from the children and the parents, that they will do a lot of the driving to facilitate children getting between the houses. But again, as children become adolescents, a lot of things start to pile up. School becomes more intense. Peers become important. They often get a part-time job. They may have a lot more extracurricular activities, and they want the freedom and independence to be able to move to those environments and a lot more without having to depend on parents. So it's never one thing that usually drives change for these children, but it certainly becomes a factor if they feel it's particularly onerous and other things are not working.
Right. Like I know as my kids are teenagers, their social network was far more important to them than me. They want to
Yeah, parents do not want to know that, and I think that's very hard for parents to start to accept. Many of them talked about they started to have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and that becomes a very important relationship in their lives. And the truth of the matter is they're more likely to opt for the parent who's closer to the boyfriend or girlfriend.
Well, that's it. That was my point. I remember, one of my kids was home on a Saturday night, and I said, come on, let's go to a movie. Mom, no. They wouldn't be seen in public with me on a Saturday night, right? Mm-hmm. But you have to be understanding of that. But, seriously, when a parent lives like 40 minutes away and you look at where their social network is, it's usually around where they go to school. So
Absolutely.
If they're going to school around one parent, then they're going to want to stay in that area because that's where it's all happening on the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And
sorry.
And so I was just saying that I guess many parents don't understand the dynamics, if they're living 40 minutes away or 2 hours away.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that also came to the fore when I was talking to these young people was that children also have a sense of home. And that is that even for some of them who have always done shared custody on a very equal basis, almost all of them could point to the one home where they felt that was more like what some people called their home base. And what was interesting is it wasn't just about belongings, for instance, where their primary source of clothing was or makeup for girls, but they also identified what I called the emotional climate. For instance, was a family dinner served, or were people kind of expected to microwave a meal when you came home? Did somebody celebrate holidays and the birthdays? Acknowledge those things. The other part of that was the emotional availability of the parent. Some children will tell you that even though they're living with that parent, they're either so busy with work or new relationships, or perhaps have other issues, whether it be chronic illness or even alcoholism, that they're not really available or interested in what's going on in their children's lives. And so they're there for the time, but they don't feel like what they have is a closeness and a connection to that parent. And interestingly enough, the presence of a pet. I like to tell people that I actually had 2 dogs and a cat who also did shared custody as well. But having that with them can create a more sense of belonging for the child as well.
So there's a lot of lessons here that our listeners can pick up on in terms of what they should be doing, like the sense of home. Mm-hmm. Being there emotionally for your kids. It's not about buying things or what they have, but it's about you and what you can do for them. Denise, you shared some really powerful quotes, things that your kids said to you. Do you have anything with respect to what we've just talked about that demonstrates those points from the kids' mouths, from what they have to say?
Well, talking about a child's sense of home, I have a young lady who has actually lived in what I had characterized as a rigid shared custody arrangement. And in her instance, the dad has been very strict about enforcing an adherence to the custodial schedule, and not so much against the mom in this case, but against the daughter personally. And interestingly enough, dad was the one who stayed in the family home. But here's what she had to say about why she liked her mom's house. She said, my mom's house felt more like home. My mom's house was more lived in. My dad's house was more, it needed to be cleaned. He always had clients coming in and out, and there were a lot of chores to be done all the time. Whereas my mom's house was more, well, we were all sort of the same way. Like, you could drop your stuff down, have friends over more often. We used to make cookies all the time with my best friends and just stuff like that. And I got a cat. That helped. She made it a lot more like home for me.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
It just says it all.
Yeah, and a lot of children felt that way, and some, some were able to point, to having, parents who really stepped up in both homes. But ultimately, most did have a preference. And it shouldn't go unsaid that, a lot of the young women, I had a lot of young women, which unfortunately is a very typical outcome for this kind of research, who definitely preferred mom's house. But I did also have, some young women who definitely preferred dad's house. It was with their dad that they felt the much closer connection. And in fact, two of the young ladies had started off in shared mother custody and had worked over their childhood. One to enter shared custody so she saw more time with her dad. One entered shared custody and really was a segue to her now living primarily with only dad. So daughters can also be very close to their fathers, too.
Sure, they can. And I remember reading a study years ago that said that boys most times were better off with their father and girls with their mother. What do you think about that?
I don't think that acknowledges perhaps what that individual child is like, and I would be loath to suggest that anybody should make a decision on custody based solely on gender.
But, there's been a lot of research, too, that says the importance of fathers in girls' lives. It was fascinating to me that it affected, like, not having a father in your life affects your sense of self-esteem. It affects your sense of what positive relationships are, because there's girls, if they don't have a father in their life, they're looking for father figures, so oftentimes you might see a girl who reaches out to someone who's a lot older than her to kind of take the place of a father. Teen pregnancy, they say, is more likely if there's not a father role model. Drinking, all those behaviors they associate with children of divorce. So I think that the importance of having a father in your life is so important. So Denise, in your research, do you talk to the fact that, or did you find out anything about fathers not being involved and what that meant to these kids?
Well, that was actually sort of one of the unexpected findings of my research, because often shared custody is being endorsed as a way, in particular, to anchor sort of fathers to their children now. And the idea, and it's quite reasonable to suggest that, parents need time together in order to forge a relationship. If they don't have the opportunity to share experiences and memories and emotions, then how can we expect there to be a relationship? And so in this case, virtually all of the participants had, at least at some point in time, even done shared custody for a minimum of 1 year. So they've had opportunity, some for even more. What was unexpected is that this isn't always a perfect way to protect fathers and what I would think is adolescent and young females, adult females. Some of them are struggling with the fact that while dads very much love them, I think there's something going on in the transition as the young women are maybe leaving. Perhaps they've rallied around a particular sport or hobby that they've enjoyed, but now young women are sort of getting into a more talk phase where they're looking for a nexus for somebody to talk about that. And when that happened, some of them were finding that their fathers are not very good at keeping in contact with them. And in fact, they feel very sad. And that was when the tears would usually flow during the interviews, when they felt that dad had now placed the burden on them as young adults to maintain the relationship. And that, dad might call and ask how their grades were, but wouldn't necessarily call and ask how they were doing emotionally.
So let's talk about this a little bit, okay? Because I'm hearing a lot about that that the kids want to be more with mom sometimes, and dad's not communicating as much as mom. But I think that dads are a little at a disadvantage. Take a situation where the family, as they're married, the dad is working and the mom is the stay-at-home mom. Obviously, she has a lot more time with her children. When children are young and when they get sick, it's mom. She's the nurturing one. So they kind of lean towards her. And dad's out there working and doesn't have the time to spend with the kids. So obviously, for a lot of dads, their communication skills aren't as great with their kids as their mom. But I think if the tables were turned, dads could be equal to moms.
Yeah, there is some truth to that. I mean, we often say, that, parenting is a learned skill, for sure. What's interesting is that for most of my kids, both parents had worked and had always worked. So dads weren't necessarily disadvantaged, particularly to the young people that I talk to. And in fact, often now, the people who want to do shared custody are middle-class parents who often have, two jobs and therefore are using shared custody in some ways to balance off all of those responsibilities associated with working and with parenting as well. But I take your point. I do think that sometimes dads have not always had the same training or the same exposure to even helping them to understand transitions around developmental phases in their child's life. And I think young daughters may be an area where we do need to help dads learn to talk to young daughters. And by the way, I would also say that young daughters probably need some coaching on how to talk to their fathers to get what they need out of them emotionally as well.
Right, and their
not
moms,
just to expect dad to do it.
And their moms need to let them know that it's not like dad doesn't care about you. Dads don't communicate the way that moms do a lot of times. We're shorter with conversations. We're more apt to use text than actually pick up the phone. And I mean, it's just men are from Mars, women are from Venus. We're a little bit different.
So I see an even more fundamental difference. Like, going back to the way we're hardwired, and Denise, maybe you can help me out on this, and Steve, I'm sure you've got lots to say about it too. Like, if you look at the way kids play in the park, right? Girls are sitting nicely in the sandbox, talking to each other. Who knows what they're talking, about at 5 years old. But they're playing together and they're communicating. Boys are running around the playground, playing tag, jumping up, whatever. So you can see the way that girls interact versus the way boys interact.
Well, Deborah, you could see the way they react in your marriage. You were the one that wanted to talk more when situations happened, perhaps, and he was the one that shut down.
Right. Mm-hmm. And men want to problem solve and women want to talk. So it's bigger than just what do girls need out of a dad and how are dads able to do it? Because it's the way I think that we're hardwired, and it's almost like someone has to be really intuitive, introspective to say, I think, although I've got to move outside my comfort zone because this is what Sally needs or this is what Johnny needs, as a dad or a mom, to say, okay, I can't just be the problem solver. I just need to be that shoulder for them.
Right. They need education. They need to be told this, I think.
Could I share a quote with one of the young women that I interviewed when she was crying about this aspect that she doesn't have the relationship with her father that she wanted. She'd been in sole mother custody for 3 years before moving into shared custody for 2 years, eventually transitioning back to sole mother custody. And this is what she had to say about how she felt about her relationship with her dad. I don't think that's fair at all. He does call. It's just he doesn't take the initiative to, make the plans. I keep on coming back to the fact that he's a guy. I asked her, why isn't it fair? And she said, well, because he's supposed to. He's my father, right? He's supposed to be the responsible one. He's supposed to care about having a relationship with his daughter. He's the older, wiser one. He should be more like gung-ho about, keeping a relationship with me. Whereas I know he wasn't with his first daughter.
Did she tell him that?
I often ask my participants those questions, and what most of them said is that they were not able to broach that subject with their fathers. They were afraid that trying to be that honest and upfront with them would cause their fathers pain, and so they preferred to keep it in, and in fact ended up crying in my interviews, which I hadn't expected, but ended up crying, being able to share this with me instead.
Well, see, I think if a lot of dads heard that, it would wake them up, and the light would go on. They'd change.
I don't think daughters want to have, yes, their needs are changing, right? And so, they're going through relationships, perhaps not just with, romantic relationships, but, they're often facing the challenges in this case of, living away from home for the first time, dealing with roommate issues, academic issues. And what they really want is a dad who will give them a call and wants to hear what they have to think, what they're thinking about things and what they have to say.
Right. I get that, but let me ask one more question. Prior to the separation, how was Dad with her? And see, I'm guessing that it wasn't much different. But now that he's gone, it's perceived as different.
But part of what I'd like to go back to is that my children had all experienced their parents' divorce between the ages of 7 and 12. Not only may the dads may not have been different, but the children were very, very different at that age and expected different things from their fathers. So younger children are more interested in whether dad's a playmate. Is dad going to take them to a movie? Are they going to go skiing together? And that's one of the important aspects to understand for fathers, is that their children are growing up and their needs are changing as well. And whether or not we can encourage children to ask for what they need, but if we can also ask parents to maybe be open to the fact that their children need things different than when they were younger children.
That's brilliant. That's brilliant, because when parents originally separate and they start the co-parenting arrangement, and especially when there's this fear for mothers who are stereotypically, I guess, the primary caregiver, they're worried that the kids are going to go to dad's house and dad's going to be the Disney dad. He gets to do all the fun things with the kids and she's the disciplinarian. But that's what kids want then. Is that what you're saying? Kids want from their dads to be their, playmate, except that changes as they get older. But nobody else is changing.
Yeah. Oh, and it may be, and this isn't all dads. I also have a number of young women who spoke about the fact that, in fact, their father is their preferred parent, that he's the one who actually listens to them and understands how they feel about things, and that mums were the ones who are a little bit more shut down. It's just that mums never quite get to the point where I found that they were completely distraught or the relationship was completely cut off, whereas some of the young women were starting to feel that if they didn't work hard to maintain something, that the relationship would sort of drift away now that they were young adults.
So Denise, I think we know a little bit more about what dads need to do in terms of communication skills. What about moms? What do they need to do for their kids? And is there a difference between girls and boys, although you didn't have a lot of boys in your study?
Yeah, I wish I had more. Believe me, I actively tried to recruit them. They're just a more reluctant group.
There you go. Like I said,
talk to you about these things.
That speaks volumes.
Yeah.
Yes, I think. Well, in some ways, it's not just about mums, but certainly what was interesting for 4 of my participants was, actually 5 of my participants, was that they started in sole mother custody, and I think we need to make mums also aware that even though that decision might have looked appropriate at the time that it was made, in all of these instances, these children eventually went on to want some time with custody with dad, and that became important. So just like dads have to understand that children are changing and what they may have wanted at one point no longer fits later on, mums have to be willing to hear. And that's the operative word in this, willing to hear that what their children need now is different than maybe what it was a few years back.
And who's going to tell them that? Right?
Well, that is probably, I think, one of the most difficult aspects that we have right now when it comes to hearing children. So there's a lot of effort that now goes into the process of how custodial arrangements will be put in place. We don't have a process or even an open dialogue encouraging parents to say, maybe we need to rethink this every year, every couple of years. I think parents go to so much trouble to get into the arrangements that they have in the first place that I think they're often afraid to open that can of worms periodically. And I think some of them are afraid to hear what their children are going to have to say, feeling that they're going to lose if their children make a decision that means that they get less time.
But you know what I love? Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, and I was just going to also say, and by the way, children, again, do not want to hurt their parents. They may want change, and in fact, many of the children who left shared custodial arrangements never openly had a conversation with their parents. Often what they did was start to make excuses. Oh, I can't come this weekend because I've got a sleepover. I've got an exam coming up. And what they did is they kind of worked slowly to move the arrangement to where they wanted it to be. Again, because they never wanted to, they didn't even know how, I think, to approach the conversation that this was no longer working and that a parent might be sad.
So for any parent that's listening to the conversation, how do you think that they should approach their kids to see if it's working for them? And maybe that they should make some adjustments.
Yeah, kids are mixed on how to approach children about that. Very much it depends upon age. I think by the time you get to an adolescent, I think you can have a direct conversation with your child.
Yeah.
For younger children, even my young adults spoke about how they don't feel that decision-making should be put upon the child. And that's a really difficult one because children might want change at that point, but they don't know how to express it. And even finding a third party to intervene to ask the child, even some of my participants identified, that would be a very difficult thing for children to do because they know that information is going to be reported back. And again, it will leave them looking like they've made the decision ultimately, and they do not want to be put in that position.
You know what I love about your research? You know, parents, in the separation agreement, you've got the parenting plan, you know, and that's a done deal. But here it is, years later, once the deal is done, you can see the impact of what that separation agreement has created. So, if anything, I hope the takeaway from our conversation today is think about what this means and that everyone changes. The parents change. They change. They have different relationships. Maybe their jobs change. Maybe your home environment changes. Perspective changes. And be sensitive to your kids.
I do think there is a big takeaway message that is definitely one of the ones that I would like parents to be able to hear. Again, how we facilitate, you know, when parents have already gone to extraordinary difficulty and maybe have had high conflict to begin with, they may not be able to do that. One of the things that I mentioned is that I had a couple of participants that I put into what I call a rigid shared custodial arrangement. And I'd like to talk a little bit about them because they are two participants, in this case both female, and both of them had experienced extraordinary conflict with their fathers when they were getting to be about 12, 13, 14 years of age. Both of these young women actively talked about the fact that they had seriously contemplated living only with their mothers. And yet neither of them ultimately made that decision. Can I share a quote with you about that?
Absolutely. Share everything with us, please.
This young lady had said, when I asked about that period of time where there'd been a lot of conflict when she'd been a young adolescent, said, I did see a psychologist for a while after my parents' divorce. I had established that I wanted to live with my mom more because my dad, he just didn't understand. What my psychologist told me he saw, my mom and I look very much alike. So when my dad would look at me, he would see my mom, and he would take out like his anger at me instead. Just a brief insert, Mom did have an affair that ended the marriage. So there was a point in time where I just wanted to live with my mom because my dad and I were fighting all the time, and I couldn't take it anymore. And I had told my mom that, but I could never tell my dad that I didn't want to live with him because I just didn't want to hurt him. So I continued the 50-50 arrangement. So you can see this young lady bending over backwards, even though it is not a wonderful living situation for her, that she would do anything to protect that. Because at one point she said, I know my father would have never forgiven me if I'd gone to live with my mother.
And mom can't say anything to dad because then dad would take that negatively.
Absolutely.
Right?
So mom was trying to support the daughter as much as she could, but even then, mom was limited in her capacity because that's what the agreement provided for a 50-50 arrangement.
So Denise, what do you think that parents should do then at the very beginning when developing their parenting plan? Like, how do we use your learning to help parents develop a parenting plan that kids aren't going to have to talk with their feet?
Well, I do think that the parenting plan somewhere in there should maybe have a clause that refers to when this parenting plan will be revisited. And maybe that's every 2 years as kids are making significant milestones. I certainly think that somewhere in and around that first year of high school seems to be an important transition time for many children, whether they were leaving shared custody or entering shared custody from a sole parent arrangement. The other aspect, too, and this isn't even the part that goes in the parenting plan, but there is no substitution for good parenting one-on-one between that parent and that child. And while parents are so concerned about how they're going to manage the relationship with the other parent, I would really encourage parents to focus on the fact that good parenting comes down to high warmth and responsiveness and high demands. We know that's what benefits children. And if parents aren't focusing on their own warmth and responsiveness, as well as setting good limits, they themselves are not going to be cultivating the relationship with the child that they want. Time alone is not what breeds good parenting.
Those are very powerful points. Really powerful. We talked a lot about relationships. Do you want to touch a little bit on transitions and fairness? I know that those were part of your research questions as well.
Yeah, so of course I wanted to ask children, and we're spending a lot of time, in our country as well as a lot of other countries, about whether or not there should be changes to laws to make shared custody what we call a rebuttable presumption. In other words, that would be the starting point for what children are expected to do unless there is evidence of neglect or abuse or other reasons why the child shouldn't do that. But I wanted to ask the child's perspective on whether or not they think it's fair. And it turns out that the word fair comes up in a lot of contexts. So that's not only how they think other children should have to do the arrangement, but it factors in to whether or not they themselves make change. And for most of the children, really what we're talking about is two things happening on: their maturation and what I call their changing perspectives around fairness. And for some children, that perspective never changes. They believe that the only arrangement that is fair is a 50-50 arrangement. And when I asked some of them, have you ever contemplated a change, they were quite emphatic that they could never do that it wouldn't be fair for their parents, and that was their utmost concern. For other children, what happened as they started to mature in early adolescence was that they started to recognize that they themselves had needs, and that those needs should be factored into the equation of what constituted an overall fairness of what arrangement was appropriate. And those are the children who ultimately made decisions to alter the arrangement that they had been in.
And when these kids alter the arrangement, albeit it didn't happen overnight, it was slow, how did that impact their relationship with the parents? I guess the parent that was losing out on more time, was there any punitive, damages there? Was there anything that they felt that changed the relationship?
Sure. Less time does give fewer opportunities to sort of cultivate that warm and nurturing relationship. And for some of them, they definitely identified that. I'm thinking about, though, they sometimes speak in tremendous contradictions. And I remember one young lady talking about how she was quite adamant that she thought children should have to do shared custody. And yet she defended her decision to leave shared custody and live solely with mom as something that was appropriate for her. And she was pointing to the fact that she also believed it allowed her to have a stronger relationship with her father because they had a lot of conflict, and by not living with him so much, she was able to develop a more positive relationship with dad. So I hate to say this, but it really is it depends answer. It depends upon the child and what they bring. It depends upon the resources that the parent brings to that as well. But there's no doubt that parents do feel that they're getting the short end of the stick when a child leaves shared custody. They have to work much harder now to arrange a dinner or a meeting and try to get something out of that as well. On the other hand, children are very quick to use media, whether it be texting and phone calls and Skype now, to maintain contact with parents, and so that does help to some degree. But I also think if parents can find a common activity that appeals to both of them. I had one young lady, it was around horseback riding. For another father and son, it was around not only did they watch hockey, but they played on a hockey team together. Those opportunities really do help find a way for parents to continue to be a part of their children's lives in a real way.
Do you find that, based on your research, that the custody arrangements affected kids as, young adults in a certain one way or another? Like when they chose to change their relationship, I don't know, did it make them more reluctant to get into a romantic relationship? Well, and I guess more like the older kids, closer to 25, yearning more for a romantic relationship, yearning less for a romantic relationship. I know from our session on our panel on Friday, these women that did not have, they grew up in a very high conflict situation, not a lot of stability. They yearned for a relationship very early on and both married very, very early. Mm-hmm. So is there any learning from your research that you can share?
I must confess it never really occurred to me to ask that question for two reasons. One, for some of them it did come up that they were starting to enter romantic relationships. But again, most of mine were only about 19 and a half years of age. So while they were starting to date, they were still very much in the early part of their undergraduate education. I don't think any of them perceive that they have the resources financially or otherwise to sort of make that more permanent. Most of them were still very much more focused on what the relationship looks like with a parent. That was still the greater focus. One of the things that my children really present a very interesting perspective too, because these were white, largely middle to upper middle class children. Their parents were by and large professionals and in the business world. And so in so many ways, my children had the protective buffers that not all children of divorce get. In a lot of ways, I mean, the fact that they're all in university speaks to the success that they're having. And one of the biases I realized only later into the interview process that I had come into is that I was expecting to be talking to the success stories of custodial arrangements. I had expected that by and large these would be very positive. And in fact, I didn't even bring any tissues to my interviews because I was expecting that, again, these children were going to be speaking very, very positively. And it was at the third interview that the young lady started to cry profusely. And I came to realize that that would be the hallmark of the vast majority of interviews. There would be tears shed. And it wasn't about their parents' divorce at this time anymore. That was an event that had happened a long time ago. What they were frustrated by now was the fact that they didn't feel that they had the quality of a relationship with a particular parent that ought to be there. And I often talk about one of the very serendipitous events that happened during my research is that I was listening to public radio here in Ontario, and there was a Dr. Paul Slovic from the University of, I believe, Oregon, who was talking about a phenomenon of psychic numbing. And this is the proclivity of those of us, when we hear about large-scale events, for instance, a genocide, they usually don't have the emotional impact on us, whereas if we hear about the story of an individual who's had very unfortunate circumstances, and I was referring recently, for instance, to a young lady who committed suicide after years of protracted bullying, and she's just a young high school girl. There's been a tremendous outpouring. And he had said something very profound for me, and that is statistics are numbers with the tears dried off. And I think these children's experiences speak to the fact that for many of them, nobody has ever sat down with them and just wanted to hear their perspective.
Isn't that
no
powerful?
Judgment, nothing that they said was going to be used against them. There was just somebody there who was willing to hear them out. And they cried.
Well, Denise, I think that your research certainly is going to make a huge impact and difference for so many parents and children of divorce, like hugely. And especially as a parent listening to this, I think that there are many lessons. Is there anything that you haven't been able to share because I've been talking so much?
Oh, no, this has been wonderful. I do want to reflect that one of my very final points that I would like to make to parents is that as they're negotiating their parenting plan, particularly for those parents who have decided that they want to do shared custody, they need to be extraordinarily attentive to the challenges that children face. And we know that when parents are going through a divorce, they themselves are facing so much emotional upheaval, financial challenges as they reorient their financial life. There's a lot of burden on parents, but there is also a huge burden on children as well. And most of them will find a way to often, settle into the arrangement, but we often talk about shared custody as what parents do for children. And I'd really like parents to hear that shared custody is very much what children are doing for their parents.
That is profound. That is a really profound comment. So I think that what we have to do then is find a way as parents to make it work without having kids do for us.
Yes, and I think that's a very extraordinarily difficult thing to do. Children are very sensitive to your emotions, and they do want to do well by you. And I, by the way, I'd also like to suggest that children are highly resilient. I mean, they gain a lot of life skills in going through this process themselves. It shouldn't all be interpreted as negative, but I do think that parents should at least be mindful about some of the choices that they make. And I don't think, for instance, that a child should be given a puppy on Christmas morning and the news Christmas afternoon that her parents are divorcing. I don't think that a child should be introduced to the man who's going to move in as her new stepfather once before he moves into the household, or a stepmother or a future stepmother that they meet on a holiday for the first time, and that's when dad decides to propose and turns the lives of their children upside down. And those are real examples from my research as well. That sometimes, unfortunately, I think the very opportunities that parents have to make good decision making in their child's best interests are sometimes the things that they themselves have not thought through about what that looks like from their child's perspective.
Wow, those are such important examples. So thank you so much. I think we've given parents so much to think about and how they can use this to change things as, time moves forward, and maybe hopefully open up the conversation between
Absolutely.
Parents if they're able to communicate effectively. Denise, thanks so much for speaking with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for your time for both of you. Thanks.
Thanks, Denise.
Thanks.
My.
Lots to think about, isn't it?
Well, yes, but you know what I'm thinking, right?
No.
I mean, out of all of what was said.
Dads.
Yeah.
Is it all dads?
Well, it just seems that way. And it really seems that way to a lot of dads. It really seems that way to a lot of dads, that mom has the custody. And it can appear to some dads that the kids don't really want to be with them. And they love their kids. And dads can be as loving as moms. And I think it's an education issue that when the situation goes down, somebody needs to tell fathers what their children need, because it's not that we're stupid, but we're just different. We don't always get it. We don't get that we have to not only call, but really, have this long conversation. It would help if someone told us. It comes more naturally to moms, I believe, because moms spend a lot more time with the kids when they're younger. And
well, I think it's about the way we communicate, and I don't necessarily think it's the time, because more and more mums are out there working just as many hours as dads.
Right, but moms are hardwired emotionally, right, I think, to these children. Right. I mean, it's just nature, the way that things happen.
Right.
They breastfeed. All of it draws towards moms. And for the most part, when kids are young and when they hurt themselves or when they get scared, they run to mom because it's all what they know and what they've done. And she said, well, it's not always this way. Sometimes they prefer the dad, but most times it's the mom. Well,
it's the moms are the nurturers and the dads are the problem solvers. But I think through Denise's research, and speaking to these kids, or her kids as she called them, we've learned some very important lessons.
No doubt.
And I loved it. It had nothing to do with the way mom was in terms of trying to get in the way of the kid's relationship with dad and vice versa. It was all about how each parent interacted with their kids and the fear that kids had to really have this conversation with their parents. It's so hard. Even at my age, if my parents do something, it's really hard for me to say, Mom, this is my life. I need to do what I need to do. There's certain things that I just can't tell my parents.
Why is that so hard?
Because I don't want to hurt their feelings.
What about in a marriage relationship or a dating relationship? Do you feel the same way? You don't want to tell your partner because you don't want to hurt their feelings?
No, it's a little bit different. I think
But why is it different? Why is it different for someone that we're in a loving relationship with that not only can we share how we feel, but we can really get in their face about it. But our mom or dad, we're afraid to say it. And we're not saying anything horrible here. We're saying that a daughter should be able to say, Dad, I wish you'd call me more, and I wish you'd talk to me. I need more. And a mom should encourage her daughter to do that.
I agree 100%. I think the problem is kids are afraid they're going to hurt their parents' feelings. And I think that parents as adults need to think about what they need to be doing. Don't wait for the kids to be calling you, but pick up the phone and take the initiative. Okay. And I think that's what's happening not enough, is that the parents aren't taking the initiative. They're leaving it for the kids.
But you don't think many men's feelings have already been hurt by virtue of the fact that the child is not with them?
Oh, but just a minute. Denise's research is shared custody. Moms and dads have equal amount of time.
Yes, well, I'm all for that.
So it's not that dads have less time and moms have more time. It's about how each parent parents.
But if a child is with the mom as the primary parent, they're not with dad that much. Mom has them more than dad. Yes?
Not necessarily in this research, but yes, I understand where you're coming from. Yeah. So it is not an optimal situation for dads. I'm not going to dispute that. It's not. It's hard. Like, it is really hard for dads that see their kids every other weekend and once during the week.
So I'm just saying to the moms listening right now, dads do care. And if you want to really be positive and try to do something helpful, talk to your ex and tell them how your daughter's feeling. Because I bet you they know. I bet you the daughter or the son comes home and says, Dad, he doesn't call me. He doesn't do this. They hear that. They'll tell that to their mom about their dad, I bet.
And mom doesn't tell dad that, little Johnny.
It's not my job. It's not my job now. We're not married. It's not my job to intervene. And I say, well, bull crap. If you really do care about your kids, if this is really about the kids, you can shoot an email. So your daughter said this matters to her. Do what you want with that information. I'm just passing it along because I love my daughter.
And as a responsible parent, then, take the initiative. Pick up the phone, send an email or text message, because, kids are so big on there. Even like little kids now are having, have phones. They're texting at 10, 11 years old. That's how they communicate. Just send them an email or a text message. How was your day? What's happening? Speak on their terms. Kids are on the computer constantly. What about a little Skype call? It doesn't even have to be longer than 2 minutes.
Right. And speaking of longer than, we're over time. And we have to move on. So I want to remind people about your new website at thesmartdivorce.com. Go check out all that Deb has for you over there, including downloadable editions of her Smart Divorce Resource Toolkit. And the Smart Guides, too, I think are downloadable.
Smart Guides, Smart Divorce audios, everything is downloadable and also available in physical hard copy. I think that a lot of people I'm finding want to touch and feel something. So whatever works for you, downloadable or physical copy, it's there for you.
Well,
the Smart Divorce resources are there to help educate you. They're there to get you through divorce so that you can make really informed decisions so that you can move forward. You can do what's in your kid's best interest. And this conversation that we're having today, it won't happen in the future because you'll have that information at your fingertips in terms of what kids need and what kids are looking for and do what's in your kid's best interest and hopefully be able to have that conversation with your co-parent.
Yeah, it's great stuff. And I had an opportunity to actually see the hard copy of the book, the new book, the resources. It's awesome. Looks great. So if you like books, this is one you want in your hand.
It's the Smart Divorce Smart Guides.
Do you autograph them all when you send them out?
That I don't, but
you should. You should personalize them because, you are the rock star in the divorce industry. I told her this weekend at the Family Support Expo, I said, you really need to rebrand yourself. Call yourself the nation's leading divorce consultant. And she's like, well, I can't say that about myself. And I'm saying, well, yes, you can. And if you can't, I will, because there's no one that I know that knows more about the entirety of the divorce process, and Deborah Moskovich. And we're honored to have you right here at Divorce Source Radio with your own show, The Smart Divorce, Deb. And we got to go, but I'll catch you next time, all right?
Fabulous. Looking forward to it.
All right. Bye-bye. As always, I hope the program helped you. If you have a comment or question you'd like to ask us, we'd love to hear from you. You can leave us a voicemail on our listener line at area code 248-686-2256. Or drop us an email with your question or comment to divorcesourceradio@gmail.com. New programs are available every week on divorcesourceradio.com, as well as iTunes, BlackBerry, Stitcher, and all over the web. If you'd like to be notified when new programs are available, you can follow us on Twitter. Our follow word is Divorce Source. Also, if you're not listening from our website, I invite you to stop by divorcesourceradio.com, where you'll find a complete program archive. If you're looking for a specific subject, simply type it into our search engine, and chances are you'll find what you're looking for. We also have other resources available at our website as well. And while you're on our website, click on the Facebook icon and join the growing Divorce Source Radio Facebook community. Thanks for listening. Until next time, make it a great week and stay healthy. I'm Steve Peck.